Good evening, everyone. My name is Dean McNeil. I'm head of the music department here at the University of Saskatchewan, but the hat I'm wearing tonight is the artistic director of the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra. Welcome to our concert. Before we begin our very special event tonight, I wanted to invite a very special person at the University of Saskatchewan. When we heard that she was attending tonight, we wanted to invite her to come up and give a land acknowledgement. So would you please join me in welcoming to the stage the Provost and Vice President Academic of the University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Marini.
Well, good evening, everybody. Bonsoir. And in the languages of the first peoples of these lands, Tansei, Tansi, Idlanate, Han, Anin, and welcome to the ones who are, we can't see each other, but I know you're there on the right. Hello. Hello. Thank you so much, Dean, for this opportunity to come forward. Dean, before we do the acknowledgement, I just would like to say kudos to you for all the ways in which you, as heading up the music department for the University of Saskatchewan and having such a strong influence across our music community of Saskatoon, that it brings us together. I just want to say thank you so much, Dean. Thank you. Earlier this month, actually, the university community was so fortunate to have a world premiere for a piece that Dean had created, which was to take us through the sounds of research, scholarly and artistic works, and it was truly extraordinary. And I imagine that we will also tonight have something of a spectacular experience being here for another world premiere here in Convocation Hall of the University of Saskatchewan. We're all here to be part of this. May I offer my thanks on all of our behalf to the orchestra, to the Hyperbolic band tonight, to Professor Stephen Ryan, who heads up the quantum signature research area for the university, and of course composer Jeff Preslev. We just so appreciate all of you and all that you make possible to come together in this way as a community. I see members of my community here of the University of Saskatchewan. I can see up the top here our President Stoichev, along with Catherine Warden, an exceptional champion for the University of Saskatchewan. Just lovely to see you both there. I see a number of deans. We have the Dean of Law here, Martin Phillipson, our Vice President Indigenous Engagement, Angela Jaime, the Chair of our Planning and Priorities Committee of Council, Vicky Squires, our Chief of Governance for the University, Julian Denku, is here. Looking around, please excuse me, colleagues, if I haven't named everybody. But it's really just part of signalling the deep commitment that the university has to the arts, along with every member of the Saskatoon community who's here today. And I want to start off by beginning with thanks, because that's where we're heading with the acknowledgement as well. We all can bring to mind reasons for thanks, and I am grateful myself for the learning that I've had in coming here to these wonderful lands of the living skies. And I've learned that to give acknowledgement of territory is to show respect. It's to be open to truth. It's to be open to making our way towards reconciliation. And I've learned that the acknowledgement of territory respects that these lands have always been lands of First Peoples, Indigenous peoples, and that this evening, this very evening together, adds music and a gathering of community to the millennia of music and community gatherings that have happened right here in these lands. And the sounds that we'll share together, the peoples, us as peoples together, and our good intentions, they bring us together in these lands. And so we acknowledge that tonight we gather on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis, and we pay our respect to the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place, and we reaffirm our relationship to one another. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Arini, for that very, very touching land acknowledgement. I just wanted to say a few things before we get started here. We're trying to go as ecologically friendly as possible, so we no longer create printed programs for our concerts. You can go to jazzyxc.ca and watch a bunch of things and learn a bunch of things that you would normally see in a printed program. This is the 10th year of the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra, and over these past few years, it's been a really interesting organization to see kind of grow and develop. I want to talk a little bit about our season coming up, only because this is our first concert of the season. Of course, we're here for this event tonight, and you'll be hearing more about that soon. I meant to have this slide up for the land acknowledgement, so I've already screwed everything up. So there we go. Now that that's done, we can relax. So we have a concert coming up in October with wonderful award-winning vocalist Dee Daniels. We're going to be playing the Ellington's sacred music. This was quite controversial at the time in the 1960s when Mahalia Jackson, a famous classical opera singer, African-American opera singer, chose and was willing to sing with Duke Ellington jazz music, which at the time was still struggling to be seen as serious, credible, important music. That, of course, it was. So this is going to be a very special concert, and Dee is going to be giving a talk. The University of Saskatchewan has a Gale Appel lecture series, and she'll be the guest speaker at that. The concert's on the 14th, which is a Saturday, and Dee will be giving her talk on the 13th. And you can check out the music department's website for more information. On the theme of Duke Ellington, we're going to have a holiday concert playing Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn's arrangement of the Nutcracker Suite, which is a very special piece of music. We're going to have a member of the Duke Ellington Orchestra. He was, his name's Brad Shigata. He's a trombonist, and he played in the Ellington Orchestra for 19 years. So it'll be very exciting to have him at that event. We tried something different last year on New Year's Eve, where the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra teamed up with TCU Place for a very fancy dinner and dance evening. We don't usually do that type of thing, but as we were all kind of coming out of COVID and itching to do something, we were very excited to do that. It was so successful that we're going to do it again this year. It kind of felt like a fundraiser, but no one was asking for anyone to open up their wallets and pay for anything other than the concert itself. This is a very special concert in the new year with the ongoing war in Ukraine, with the invasion of Ukraine. Institutions in places like Canada, like the Ukrainian Culture Museum, are going through difficult times when people would normally contribute to the sustainability of the museum. Quite gratefully now, they're making donations directly to the war effort. So these cultural institutions, like the Ukrainian Museum of Canada here in Saskatoon, need our support and our attention. And we have a very special event here. We've commissioned a bunch of composers to write music, to rearrange Ukrainian music in kind of a jazz, abstract kind of way. The concert date is the birth date of Taras Shevchenkov, who is one of the most famous Ukrainian poets in kind of layman's terms. He's like the Robbie Burns of the Ukraine. And so that's going to be a very special concert. A new book has come out called Ode to a Tenor Titan. It's a biography on Michael Brecker, who's probably one of the most, if not the most influential tenor saxophonists in the second half of the last century. And we have an absolutely spectacular musician joining us, Jim Brennan, for that concert. And then we're going to finish the season featuring a concert that will celebrate the great Kenny Wheeler, one of the most prolific trumpet players and composers to come out of Canada. And there'll be a small conference at the university in which we'll be talking about music influenced by Wheeler, and that is also supported through our Vice President Research Office. So it's an exciting time, and we hope you'll consider coming to some of those concerts. Some of the lessons learned over the past 10 years, one question that I always ask when we're considering doing repertoire is, can the thing that we're considering doing happen in town without our involvement? And if the answer is yes, we shouldn't do it. So if the Saskatoon Symphony or the wonderful Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra runs the basement, or the Jazz Festival, or the Richard Mello Festival, or the Strata Festival, or the U of S Jazz Ensemble can tackle something, then let them do that. So tonight is a project that would not happen any other way. I think it's safe to say that. And what I found, lessons learned over the past 10 years, is one of the kind of outputs that I didn't anticipate with the Saskatoon Jazz Orchestra is not only is it a way to culturally develop our community, but it's also kind of a research, scholarly, and artistic work stimulator and outreach vehicle for the university. We've teamed up with people like Bill Wazer, who's won the Governor General's Award in nonfiction. We wrote a piece of music that was premiered by the Regina Jazz Society, and the stimulus behind that was Bill Wazer's book work, in particular a book called Saskatchewan, A World We Have Lost. And so it's an hour-long story of the history of Saskatchewan as told through jazz. We've teamed up with people like Alison Glenn, who is an artist in our Department of Art and Art History, who also has synesthesia, and we produced some really interesting videos, animated films, and so we've done some things that I didn't really expect that we would be able to do. And so when you kind of ask, why are we doing what we're doing tonight? Artists and mathematicians are both keen observers of the world, commentators of the world. And there's a question that I think creative people are often asking themselves is, how do we get new things to happen? How do we get creativity to go? Leonardo da Vinci, and then emulated by Igor Stravinsky, had a saying that said, creativity is born in constraint and dies in freedom. And that might seem opposite to what you normally think, but it's the constraints, it's placing barriers and parameters and kind of painting yourself into a corner, that's when the creative juices start to flow. And I think that is certainly something that is you're going to observe happen tonight. I have a great interest in music, obviously, and also the natural sciences. One of the things that was famously attributed to Einstein, they asked a bunch of scientists, if you could ask him one question, what would your question be? And the overwhelming majority of the questions were, how did you know? How were you able to take a simple idea like acceleration and gravity are the same thing, and then do all of that work to create the special theory of relativity? And there's this idea that intuition is reason in a hurry. And I think that's true for geniuses like them, but also for the two people that are going to be speaking tonight, that there's a play between their intellect and their intuition, both internally and between the two, that I find absolutely fascinating. So I'm not going to tell you too much about them. I'm going to let them speak about the project. As Dr. Arini said, Stephen Ryan is the director of Quantum, and Jeff is a colleague of mine, a composer of many talents. Jeff and I were playing a concert once opening up for the great Wayne Shorter, and unsolicited afterwards, Wayne Shorter took me aside and he said, you know, this composer is really something. He has his own language and he really liked his arrangements, and that's coming as quite high praise. So if Wayne Shorter likes Jeff, I thought, well, he's good enough for Saskatoon. So I just wanted to underscore the very deep commitment to this project. These two gentlemen have been working on this project for over 2 years. They are very, very committed to each other and to their disciplines and to understanding each other's disciplines. And I'll close with saying, as we're going through tonight, I would invite you to kind of think of the dialogue that they're having on two levels. The content of itself, of this connection between mathematics and music, but also I would invite you to kind of reflect upon how they're interacting with one another, how they've been inspired by one another, how they kind of feel their way through each other's intuition as they're racing towards the product. So we hope you enjoy this, and without further ado, would you please join me in welcoming Dr. Stephen Ryan and composer Jeff Preslav.
thanks for the marvelous introduction, Dean. It's amazing to be here with this sold-out crowd. Clearly, we need a math and music course for bolstering enrollment, so that's something we should work on. And I do want to acknowledge the Quantum Innovation Signature Area that I'm a part of, and the Research Center, the collective community around quantum, and the funding for this event has come from the Quantum Initiative at the University of Saskatchewan. So, I think one way to start, I'd like to motivate what this is all about, not just what we did with the math and the music, but also the science that we tried to capture and tell a musical story about. So here's a picture. I'm just curious, let's get a little bit of audience engagement going. Does anyone know what this is? A quantum computer, that's great. I tried this earlier and someone said a chandelier. But that's exactly right. Okay, so that is a computer, first and foremost. It doesn't look like the computer what nature picked here again is largely hexagonal columns, and has the same thing to do with efficiency and stability. But these are all very macroscopic things. These are things we can see with our eyes, but we can think about materials very deep within them. If we peer inside a material, you also see patterns. So, there's two different patterns here. They're actually made from the same constituent ingredients. So these are collections of atoms. We have oxygen atoms and we have silicon atoms. And if you look really closely at this, both pictures kind of look the same. You see a silicon atom, that's the blue stuff, connected to two of these oxygen atoms, and then these pieces are connected together. Locally, if you zoom in on it, they both look the same, but if you stand back, one is forming a hexagon pattern, whereas the other is not. It's much more disordered. So the thing on the left is these are actual materials in nature. The thing on the left you refer to as a crystal, and the thing on the right, I guess, is not a crystal. Okay, you need a word for it. We call it amorphous. Okay, so you have things that have a nice irregular arrangement. Crystals, crystalline. Amorphous is the other extreme. You can have stuff in between that's kind of in between. Here's another sort of take on this: crystal versus amorphous. But so back to this. As I said, these are actual materials in nature. Just think of this as a blueprint for making stuff. And again, they're both silicon dioxide, silicon and two oxygen atoms, but they're arranged in a different way. So I actually brought these. Ta-da! Okay. So the thing on the right, I'll start with, is a block of just some ordinary glass. Okay. The thing on the left, the more ordered, is. Does anyone know what the thing on the left is? Sand. Oh, well, yeah, quartz. Yeah. So I have a stick of quartz. Okay, and they're made of the same stuff, but they have different properties based on this different geometry on the inside. Means they have slightly different functional properties. If I drop the glass cube, it's probably going to break. If I drop the quartz, it's stronger, it's more rigid. It's hopefully not going to break. We thought about going to the realm of performance art and dropping these, but it's a kind of don't try this at home moment. I don't want glass to fly in the eye of the violist.
Yeah, security said no.
Yeah, it's what it is. And then it runs the risk that the wrong one breaks and it all falls flat. So anyway, so two different. The point is that you can have the same ingredients, but if you assemble them differently, it might behave differently. Okay? I think that stands to reason. You bake a cake. You don't bake the frosting and then smear the cake on top. That's an arrangement that might not be so appealing as opposed to the standard way of baking a cake. Okay? So the point is, geometry is important. It's not just the ingredients. Okay? This is a three-dimensional. So when you look at this is happening on the screen. It's two-dimensional. Here's a three-dimensional crystal, and you have a nice regular arrangement of atoms. That's the red stuff. The white stuff are electrons that are moving through this material, because a thing that we're really interested in, a property that we're interested in, is the conductivity of electricity. That brings us back to those devices at the beginning, things that conduct electricity. And different geometries might lead to different kinds of conductivity behavior. And if we play around with that geometry, we might be able to come up with some designer behavior that could be really important for those quantum computers that we discussed at the beginning. And by the way, quantum is really just the science of the really small. It's the science of what happens when you go and peer deep inside stuff. So this is a picture of where quantum really begins. Okay? It's just the science of the tiny. Okay? So people are taking advantage of this geometry, and here's a paper from Nature, a famous science magazine, or at least a news article from Nature. And here's a material which we would broadly classify as what we call graphene. It has this telltale hexagonal structure, and if you can see that, but you can maybe see some hexagons there. So again, we're seeing these hexagons in nature, and they're a popular pattern. We've really talked about kind of two kinds of tilings, by squares and by hexagons. Here's someone's bathroom floor where both are happening at once. I guess originally they went with the hexagons, then someone decided to cover it with squares, but then they decided they didn't like it, I guess, and so they started undoing it. Okay, but the point is that either of these are a good tiling for two-dimensional space, like your floor or your table. Okay. And again, many materials in nature, when you look inside them, if they do have a nice regular arrangement, it's going to be one of these. And one of the interesting things is you could ask the following question, and here's where some of the science really comes in. You have a material like this silicon dioxide, let's say, that has one of these arrangements on the inside, let's say by squares or by hexagons. And you can ask yourself the following question. If you want to understand the behavior of the whole material, might it be enough to understand the behavior of the material just in one of these little cells, one of these little squares or hexagons? The amazing thing is that there are materials for which you only need to know what's happening in one square, one hexagon, to understand the properties of the entire material, which means that if you engineer its behavior in that one square hexagon, then you can control the behavior of the entire material. This is a deep fact in say, physics and mathematics. It's been put to use for about 100 years, and it's a cornerstone of material science. And the interesting thing about this is that you don't just think about the interior of one of these squares, you should think about the edges as well, because if you look at kind of the A side of this picture, there's a square that's highlighted. And when you look at that square, when you get to the left edge, well, that's the right edge of the next square. So things start repeating at the next edge. Things start repeating over again at the next edge, which means that the left edge and the right edge of your square are secretly the same. Also, the bottom and the top are the same, because the top edge of your square is the bottom edge of the next square. So that's where it starts repeating in that direction. So what you get is what's happening there. If the left edge and the right edge are secretly the same, then you could fold them together. And if the top and bottom are secretly the same, then you can fold them again, and you get a donut. Let me just take a sheet of paper just to demonstrate what you see on there. So, I take my sheet of paper. The left edge and the right edge are really the same. Fold them together like that. Now I have a tube. This is not very bendable anymore, but I would bend it like this now, join it together, and I have a donut. The fancy math word for that is a torus, by the way. Is that donut? Also 2 syllables and works really well. Okay, so here's the famous donut. But the point is that for a great many, maybe a surprising number of materials out there, understanding its global properties of the entire material boils down to the physics of the entire material, boils down to the mathematics of the donut. And this is supposed to be a math jazz event, and maybe you're wondering, where's the math? Because you may be wondering, where are the numbers, where are the equations? Well, I'm here to tell you that math, there's a whole part of math that has nothing to do with numbers. Okay? That part of math you might call arithmetic. And so if you've had adverse reactions to numbers in the past, I'm here to tell you that there are whole parts of mathematics that have nothing to do with numbers or equations. Okay? So that's part of the messaging here. That's the public service announcement.
It is a relief to me, yes.
And people, as I said, over the past 100 years have been putting these ideas we just saw into really great effect. Engineering and re-engineering materials to do more and more special things. The whole microelectronics industry has come from this. And there was a Nobel Prize in 2016 for some folks here who took these ideas really far and were able to do some fantastic things at the edges of physics, math, material science, chemistry. And this is when I started to get interested actually in this subject. Here's the Nobel Prize Committee trying to explain these surfaces by tearing apart pastries. We didn't bring pastries, but they did. They're a very learned committee. Their spelling is a little off. So the science of shape is topology, but no one's perfect. They didn't catch that before. Their media people didn't catch that before it went live. But let me ask you a question. So we've been talking about squares, hexagons, the honeycombs. It would be a reasonable question, it's the kind of question a mathematician asks, do you see other kinds of tilings in nature? Okay. Why aren't the bees making octagonal honeycombs, so like stop signs instead of hexagons? So I invite you in your mind just for a second, picture that you have a piece of paper or a table, and you start taking, suppose I gave you some tiles that look like stop signs. And you tried covering the table, you tried tiling the table with them. Would you be able to do it in a nice way so that they don't overlap, but there's also no empty space between them? What do you think the answer is?
No.
Hearing lots of no's. Yeah. The best you can do is this. And so you see those kind of red or orange spots are the spots that you couldn't fill in. Okay, well that means that we can't do any more. Done. You can all go home now. No, the key is to persist. Okay? So with a little bit of creativity, artistic creativity, you might produce something like this. This is a tiling of your table by octagons, but we had to cheat a little bit. So there's an octagon, a big octagon in the center. Okay? It looks almost like a regular octagon, but you'll notice that there's slightly curved edges. And then when you go out into the sort of next ring of octagons, they're getting a little bit more warped. They still have 8 sides, you can count them, but you can see that they're kind of deforming, stretching in a particular way. And then you go out to the next ring, they're getting even more stretched or warped and smaller, and they continue out that way. This is actually a tiling by octagons on a curved surface. And so we call a hyperbolic tiling, hence the hyperbolic and the title of this whole thing. So this, and by the way, this to us looks like the octagons are not all the same size, but if you had a different kind of eye that, sees the world in a hyperbolic way, maybe a kind of, insect-like compound eyes, they might all look the same to you, okay? So it's just, this is all in the eye of the beholder. To our eyes, which prefer flat space, these look like the octagons are changing, but to a different kind of eye, they might be all the same, okay? So the hyperbolic viewer would see this thing straight and would think that this stuff was all warped. Okay? So it's just all in the eye of the beholder. Now, this is as much a mathematical idea as it is an artistic idea. Okay? So this has been used to great effect in art. So does anyone know the artist behind this? Yes, exactly. M.C. Escher, okay, artist who is inspired by unusual geometries like this. Okay? So you could ask the question, suppose for a moment, suppose that you could make a material where its crystalline structure looked like this. Atoms were arranged according to this, rather than according to what the bees prefer, the honeycomb, the hexagonal lattice. Well, you could ask, do the properties of the material, its physics, its conductivity, can they be determined purely by studying the one octagon in the center? And if you did, then you could ask, well, again, the edges can get folded together. One edge will, one edge is really secretly the same as its opposite edge, and so on. Now there's, I could, and these arrows are sort of, telling you how you might start to pair edges together, because, one edge is really, the start of the next octagon, so they should really be the same. And so what would happen is this: if you started making these gluings, okay, if you start to glue together the opposite sides of the octagon, well, what you get is actually now a donut with 2 holes. I think that's a pretzel, but I'm never sure. I'm never sure if a pretzel has 2 or 3 holes. Okay, I'm going to be honest. But you get another form of pastry. Okay? Now we've upgraded to 2 holes. So if you are having trouble visualizing this, and I have trouble visualizing this, we have a video. Okay. And so you can just see this in action. Okay. This video is pretty silent for a couple of minutes.
Yep,
Jeff has kindly agreed to...
We're going to step back to that 100 years
Yeah.
and have some silent movie music.
Silent movie music? Yeah.
Yes.
So you can watch the octagon become the 2-hole pretzel. Ta-da. Thanks, Jeff. That was beautiful.
It seems like we can improvise math.
Well, and so here's our new pastry. And the question is, again, okay, this was a mathematical exercise or a geometric exercise, but the question is, can you go from this kind of crystal, this hyperbolic crystal, to something like this? So this might look like maybe like a chip to you, but really what it is it's an artificial material. This is a material made completely synthetically that is modeled on this geometry and has very unusual electrical conductivity phenomena. One thing is that it can potentially operate at much warmer temperatures than what we were saying at the beginning. So this could be an answer to some of the engineering limitations involved in quantum computing. Okay. So this is sort of taking us, I guess, from the mathematical idea to, again, something that could become a component in a world-changing device. Okay. This is all in its infancy, but my co-author, Professor Joseph Macheko at the University of Alberta, and we had asked this question of, can you make materials based on octagons instead of hexagons? And then we, subsequently worked out we used mathematics to predict how such materials would behave. And this is an actual device that was engineered by a different group in Princeton and Maryland. And our findings, our mathematical findings, agree extremely well with how this behaves. And so the math and the actual materials, agree, which is a great test of this. But this article that we put out in Science Advances about what we call now hyperbolic band theory, and the band did not start as a musical term, but rather, when you're following these electrons, if you like, mathematically moving through this material, they're sort of excited to different energies, which we call different bands. So hyperbolic band theory. And this generated a lot of attention because of its potential implications, again, for how you might design next generation materials. And we were thinking about different ways to tell this story. And so this is the third paper in the sequence of scientific articles about hyperbolic band theory. This is written with myself with an undergraduate student named Elliot Kienzle, who's a fantastic mathematician. He's now a PhD student at the University of Berkeley. But in addition to being a fantastic mathematician, Elliot is an incredible visual artist. And so there were these illustrations that Elliot made for the paper to try and tell the story, again, without equations, without numbers, but purely visually. And so Elliot made these beautiful, beautiful images, about 13 of them for the paper, that also attracted a lot of attention in their own right. And this sort of got us thinking, what other ways could there be to try and tell the scientific story here, the mathematical story here, in what other media are available to us. And that's where the connection with Dean came in. So I'd already been talking to Dean for quite some time about the intersection of math and music. Dean has a particular passion and an excellent understanding of mathematics as an art and as a science. And Dean knows that I have an interest in music. I'm an amateur jazz guitarist. I have to say this in hushed tones in the presence of such professionals. But Dean knows about that, and Dean also knew that I was also already involved in some projects melding math and music. So, for instance, I was involved in a project with his colleague, Dr. Jennifer Lang, on using mathematics to understand vibrato in the human voice. This applies to choral music. I think Dean is an incredible connector of people. So not only anticipated that this story could be told in a musical way, but also somehow knew that Jeff was exactly the right person to do it.
I'm a semiconductor.
We did not clear that comment. That's good. How long have you been holding on to that? Years. It was fantastic. But yeah, Dean had the good taste and sense to connect us. And I do feel you are somehow a secret mathematician, maybe a public mathematician.
That way, yeah.
Yeah, and it was just,
I just didn't know.
We've had 2 years of furious, fantastic discussion about how to translate this into music. But we did not want to create music that was simply inspired by the math and the science. We certainly have the mission of, being true maybe to the mission of wanting to find ways to communicate these ideas to the public large, to new audiences. It was really about actually translating the paper almost line for line into music. This really is a musical form of the paper. Of the original paper. And this was, I think, an ambitious thing, and it could not have been possible without your great intuition for how math might be embodied in music, Jeff. And again, as I was saying earlier to you, I was looking back at by the way, Jeff and I have not met in person until yesterday. Yeah. So this was all done over Zoom. Okay, so that's one thing. But I was looking back at our emails, and I think our first email was actually, thanks to Dean, was exchanged on September 20th, 2021. So this is the 2-year anniversary, actually, of when this started. So, I think that's all I have to say for stage setting, what the science is about. But maybe Jeff.
Sure.
To you now.
Sure. 2 years ago, Dean approaches me and says, "I have someone I'd like you to meet. I think this will work very well." And Dean's intuitions about these things are often dead on, at least where I've been concerned. So we're in a situation where Steve has written this brilliant, possibly world-changing paper, and thinks that it can be that same story can be told through music, and that was a very striking insight. And so the first thing I did was to read the paper. Now I don't speak math, so it was like looking at cuneiform, you know. When they say it's all Greek to me, this is like literal because it's littered with Greek symbols and things like that, and I didn't really know what they meant. But the English part of it, you know, the part that after reading through it, even just once, I could see that it was music, that there were things that were going on here that, you know, that I recognize from the way I write music and the way the music I've studied, it seems to be put together. And at that moment, there's a striking realization, which is that if I could learn this language, then I could quite specifically render this, you know, deep, multifaceted, extremely coherent thing. This thing that got expressed as a paper, and it's not very long. It's maybe 10 or 11 pages. In real music that goes in ways that I'd never written music before, and maybe nobody has. I don't know. But another striking insight that happened is that our intuitions about these two things are often quite wrong. The popular idea about what music is the trajectory of emotion. It's about emotion. It's about expressing, you know, feelings and all the ways that it symbolizes all, you know, the way our heart moves. But really, music is made of numbers. You wouldn't feel those things if the numbers weren't coherent. And so it has this very deep arithmetical, mathematical. There's a wonderful word that comes up in this situation, which is isomorphism, which means two things that, to first appearance, seem to be completely different, but then at the bottom, they're exactly the same. They have the same form. And so, in the big picture, math and music are isomorphic, at least the way I've come to believe it, which is that our intuition about math is also backwards, right? We think it's the one thing that humans do that is devoid of emotion and is purely objective, but this is completely not the case. Math at the level that Steve's doing it is highly artistic, it's highly creative, it's highly intuitive. The things that mathematicians care about are beauty and balance and isomorphisms, right? This motif sounds like this motif sounds like this, but they're made of the same chord, or something like that, right? This is how math goes. So the ancients had this idea that, you know, math and music were pretty much the same. There's a reason why Pythagoras did, you know, aesthetics as well as mathematics. Anyway, we don't need to get too far into that, but I think you get the idea. So that leads us to the first piece, right? Okay, so the big idea here is that things go a certain way in our normal flat surfaced world, and they're pretty easy to calculate in a lot of ways. You can make the square timeline, you can fold the edges together, and you get this nice little donut. And that's very meaningful. And you can also take the corners of these squares and you can shift them, or you can shift the grid so that the corners are now somewhere in the middle of the square, and then you get another grid. And you can describe the process of going from one of those things to the other, and that's very important to band theory, traditional band theory. So you've got that thing, and then you've got what happens when you live in hyperbolic space, and so this is the huge idea. Can you take those things and make similar kinds of calculations in hyperbolic space? So the first piece is about flat space, and what you'll hear is something that sounds like tiling. And in this case, one of my vertical side of the tile is notes, and the horizontal is time. So I start with the tiling, where you get a tune made of eight notes, and you get time in 8 beats, right? And you get repetitions. We've got a vamp. A bass vamp is a super obvious way to, where you get, you know what a bass vamp is. It's when you get a little riff on the bass and it just keeps repeating and it's groovy, right? So that's one thing. And then as the piece goes, I change the dimensions of the tile to show how you can tile surfaces in different ways. So we add another 4 notes, now we've got all 12 notes, and we add another 4 beats, and now we've got 12 beats, and so that changes the groove. And then we have a little section where the riffs meet together one way, and then the other way, and then you've got the chorus, right? And then the piece ends with shifting the grid, and that gives you a different chorus, but it sounds kind of like the first one. And it's all quite literal, but it's also art. So I think you'll recognize that it goes like music, which was an interesting project because we have software to write music now, and you could have taken some of these ideas and taken them quite literally and programmed the computer to do it, but to me, the real project was to write music for humans, because that would be the real test of whether this idea works. Okay, so here's the first one, and let's do it. One, two.
Fantastic.
Thanks, man.
Well, that was flat space.
Yes,
The
that was
next
flat space.
movement
Yeah.
is hyperbolic space.
Mm.
So how do we hear the curvature, Jeff?
Yeah, this was a huge problem, and there was one obvious thing right away, which is that a hyperbola is just, or one way to talk about a hyperbola is just the sequence of numbers where the numerator is 1 and the denominator is just the number line, the whole numbers. So you start, you've got 1 over 1, and then 1 over 2, and then 1 over 3, 1 over 4, right, to infinity, and that gives you this shape on a grid, right? So to a musician, that's immediately like overtones, right? And like the harmonics on a string. And then so I'm thinking, like Euclidean space is the chromatic scale, and hyperbolic space is the overtone series. But the problem is humans can't play the overtone series. I mean, we play the first few notes, and then once you get into the top of the notes, it's all out of tune. And it's, no music goes this way, right? And certainly not that humans could do. I mean, a computer could do it, but humans could. So that idea didn't work. But then we have these beautiful pictures, and the idea of matching opposite sides in a world where things curve, that's very suggestive musically. So all I needed was a curve. And it's very easy to compose a curve. I mean, a melody that goes like this, or a melody that goes like this, right? So now I have a theme, right? I just composed that. I used a certain pitch language because it suited the symmetries. I won't go into that, but and then you can match the sides because that curve can be turned up around like this. You match it to the other side, right? It can be turned on its side. It can as you go around the tile, you can think of each side as being kind of a different pitch center, so it just like moves across the different intervals of the octave. And so I made a torus out of the curves, another torus, and then I made the two form, the thing with two holes, the pretzel, out of the curves. And that's pretty much what this piece is about. Okay? Trent Reshny on the tenor sax solo.
Amazing. Well, I think that brings us to the third section of the paper, and the third movement, which is all about duality. And so maybe again, the motivation behind this is that when we're looking at conductivity, looking at electrons moving through the material, you could ask, where is the electron at a given moment? You could also ask about how fast is it moving, or what velocity does it have? And it turns out that those two things are not unrelated. And you can choose, when you start doing actual calculations, you can choose to focus on the position, the where, or you can choose to focus on the momentum or velocity, the how fast. Now, in flat space, it takes two numbers, a pair of coordinates, north and south, north and sort of north or south, or how far east or west. It takes two numbers, two cardinal compass directions to say where you are in the material. It also takes two numbers to say, how fast the particle, the electron, is traveling. So there's a balance there. Some balance is broken when we go to the hyperbolic world. So there it still takes two numbers to say where the electron is in the material. But now it takes four numbers to say how fast it's moving. So there's a jump in, it's called dimension.
Yeah, it's so weird.
Yeah, so it's weird. It's one of the unusual things about it. There's a jump from 2 dimensions to 4 dimensions. So Jeff, how do we hear 4 dimensions?
Well, that was a tough problem. Because we can't really imagine what the other two are. We can sort of imagine what the third one might be, and philosophers have argued for centuries what the fourth one is. I mean, sometimes we think it's time, but it transcends that kind of relation to hard reality as we usually experience it. It's like you've got these two things that you're not quite sure what they are. But it was very suggestive to me that you might want to express the two-dimensional part in a two-voice composition, and you might want to express the four-dimensional thing in a four-voice composition. And we have a tried and true form for that, which has been around for a few centuries, and it's called a fugue. And if you've probably heard fugues, famously, Bach is famous for writing extremely complicated ones that are, unbelievably exciting to listen to. But it was a thing that musicians did. I mean, it was like, some of these guys even improvised them, which is, I have no idea how they do that. And I'm a professional improviser. Anyway, so I decided to write a fugue. And so the beginning of the piece, before the drums come in, the first section, is a two-voice fugue. And so that represents the two dimensions. And there are very specific ways that I matched the subject of the fugue, the theme, and the counter-subject, which is the kind of counterpoint that goes with the theme. And that comes from, first of all, from the previous piece. I used the theme from the previous piece. I turned it upside down for fun. And then it goes along and expresses what it's like to be in two dimensions. And then we've got the next part of the piece, which is the four-dimensional space, which is related but obviously different and very difficult to draw the map between them. And so now that's a four-voice fugue. And I deliberately made it even quirkier than the two-voice fugue because it's like, what is this thing? And so you get a four-voice fugue going on for a while. And then, because they actually are related, you're going to get the four-voice fugue on top of the two-voice fugue. And hopefully it's not complete chaos. But, that's what we did. So here's the 2D and 4D. I lied. The second part, if you started with the cello and the drums stopped, the next piece, it changes with when the drums come out. So anyway, sorry.
So, amazing. Fourth section now, fourth movement. I was clapping so hard that I jumped ahead in the slides, but I'm back to where we're supposed to be.
Okay, cool.
So this fourth movement is all about now we're in the hyperbolic geometry and we've turned on the electric current.
Mm-hmm.
The electrons, the juices are flowing, and in the paper we're doing all kinds of calculations now for a very particular hyperbolic geometry. So this octagon that you see here, this is a very symmetric octagon. It's called the Boltzmann octagon. It makes the Boltzmann tiling, and it produces that two-hole pretzel with those gluing. So you can see one. So this is the most symmetric way of doing it. So one at the top gets glued onto one at the bottom. Two over there gets glued to the opposite side. So you see the two up in the kind of northeast corner goes to the two in the southwest corner, and so on. And then that'll produce, like we saw in the video, the two-hole pretzel. So this is a recipe, a very particular recipe for doing that. You can see the gluings that you're supposed to do, and we did calculations to figure out exactly what the electrical conductivity, what the bands look like in this geometry. And one of the tools that we used to do that was to break up this fundamental octagon into tiny little triangles and do the calculations in little tiny pieces until we understood everything that was going on the octagon, and then the whole material. And I think you found this triangle point of view quite useful, actually, for composition.
Yeah, sure. So this thing looks like a shape, but it doesn't come from nothing. You can generate it with other shapes, and the other shape you can do it with is triangles. Right? You can have these hyperbolic triangles where, to us, one or more of the sides looks like it's curved. Here, I'll show you one like that, for instance. Right? In hyperbolic space, all your polygons, the angles don't add up the way we're used to. Like, so triangles, the three angles don't add up to 180 degrees, which is what everybody learns in grade school, right? They add up to less than that. And so I did this thing where I found out what that triangle was. And in a different notation, it's a fraction of a half circle, which they call pi, these mathematician people. And so it turns out that the triangle is fractions of pi. But if you take all the notes of the chromatic scale and you make like a half circle going one direction and a half circle going the other direction, right? Then I can go to the center of the circle and measure the angle between two notes, right? And so if you start at C at the top, call that 0, and you go to the pi over 4 angle, if you go up, you get D sharp, okay? If you go down, you get A. If you go up to pi over 3, you get E. If you go down to pi over 3, you get G sharp, right? So if I make a triangle using these angles, so if one side is C and I go in that direction, I'm going down, to A. And now if I'm on A and I go down again, right, I get, what do I get? I get F, okay? Now here's something weird, right? If this was a normal triangle and I did it the other way, I did it backwards, I would still end up with A, C, and F, right? But in hyperbolic space, if I go the other direction, like if I start on the C and I go to the bottom, I end up with E instead of F. So my third side changes depending on which direction I go. And This turns out to be very important, right, Steve?
This is an unusual feature of working in hyperbolic land. We're not in Manhattan anymore.
Exactly, it's not a grid.
If you go 2 blocks north and 3 blocks west, or if you go 3 blocks west and 2 blocks north, in flat land, you end up in the same spot. But if you go 2 blocks north, 3 blocks west in hyperbolic land, or do west and then north, you end up in a different spot.
Yeah, so now I have this kind of, this also suggests to me a little bit of quantum superposition, right? And I'm 2 notes at the same time, and I don't know until I actually play them which note it's going to be, right? But anyway, I've got these triangles, and they either give me, in this particular one, they either give me ACE or they give me ACF. Well, this is extremely convenient, as it turns out, because in music we call these triads, and they're the basic building. It's this, everybody knows what this is. Right, that's the FAC, and then ACE is. Right, so I found myself in the happy position of hyperbolic space being essentially tonal. Right? It's like, these are like your basic guitar chords, and it's brilliant. But if you start reflecting these triangles, like taking one edge and matching it with the next edge, then eventually, if you go around 8 times, you get one of these octagons, and then if you take the bottom and you reflect it, you can start reflecting these triangles in all kinds of ways. And if the edges all match, you end up with, one of those and one of those. Right? So put them all together, and you get the tile filled with these triangles. And if you go back here, you see that if I go down, I get all these combinations of notes, and they're all triads, and they're all different. And then if I move them around to this, I get a sequence, I get symmetries, I get all these things that are features, characteristics of this situation. And because it's not different going up and down, I have a different map for descending. Right? And all of these patterns are extremely meaningful to musicians. This is the essence of a huge body of the way music works. But they're not next to each other in the way that it usually happens. Right? Like usually you take these triads, and if you're in a key, they have a particular relation, and everybody knows this intuitively. But this is different. This is going on different levels of symmetry, and so I end up with much different harmonies and much different ideas of what a melody is. Okay? So the first part of this piece is just taking triangles and trying to create the whole lattice, the whole tile, in expressing these triads musically. And then the second half of the piece is this. Right? So once Steve has put the numbers to it, the little triangles, and adding them all up, you get what these are like energy maps. You could think of them, right? Like the blue parts are cool. As it gets to yellow through orange, it's hot. I mean, in my analogy, right? That's not technically exactly what it is, but I'm looking at it.
Where it's hot tells you that that's the highest chance of finding the electron at that spot in the octagon versus the blue part.
So really, they're maps of probability, which is even more suggestive. I kind of love that idea. So then, if you take my tiles and put them over Steve's tiles, now you have kind of pathways for the music to go. You have cool and hot pathways, and you have moving from cool to hot, and you have points of hot, points of coolness, right? So then the second half of the piece is each one of those tiles, right? Each one of those maps, and rendered in music with the material from the triangles and the tiles. So there's a long, complicated explanation, but that's what this is. Okay? So here's movement 4.
So the fifth and final movement, the last part of the paper that we put to music, has to do with, well, these crystals have, well, you know, I think you brought this in the last section, Jeff, because at first we were sort of talking about, you know, if you have a tiling, you know, what happens if you sort of, you know, move it along, you know, up and down or side to side, call that translation. But I think you start to bring in the idea of rotation.
Right.
And this is special because, you know, when you slide something, all the points move. Nothing was where it used to be. But when you rotate something, there are points that don't move. I mean, I have to get some more mileage out of these props. So, the glass cube. This was not the one that was a crystal, remember, it's the quartz. But let's pretend this was the crystal. Okay, so I've got my crystal, and I start to rotate it like this. A lot of points most of the points are moving, but we know the points in the very center are not. They're staying where they are. There are other kinds of symmetries or transformations that have points that don't move, like reflection. So when you look in the mirror, you've been reflected. Left and right are not where they're supposed to be. They're opposite now. But the points in the very center of you when you're looking in the mirror are exactly where they're supposed to be. That's the line of reflection. They haven't moved. So unlike translation, sliding around, rotation, reflection, they have points that stay in place. We call those fixed points. They're fixed in place. They are very special. Well, they're special points because they don't move. And then you could ask the provocative question. We said, maybe there are materials that to understand them completely, you just have to understand, one octagon. Is it maybe possible to just can you get away with just understanding the points that don't move when you start spinning your material around or reflecting it? And the answer is yes. Yes, in some cases that's true. The thing, though, in hyperbolic lens is always a little bit more to consider than in flatland. There are actually 4 kinds of symmetries or transformations with points that don't move, not just the basic rotation and reflection. And those are sort of illustrated here. This is the Boltza octagon again, with some rotations and other things going on, but this is sort of mapping out the things that don't change. You can see some points in red. These are points that don't move when you apply various kinds of symmetries to the situation. It turns out those are the special points that can allow you to understand the whole material just from those points and not even just the whole octagon. So from a computational point of view, it's a free lunch. Okay, it's amazing. But I guess my question for Jeff is, in this 5th and final movement, will we hear the special points?
Yes, because otherwise I wouldn't be here. They would have fired me a long time ago. Every moment of this, every time something clicked in my head about how this was working, I would get so excited. But this was the one that excited me the most, and also because I can see that there's a lot more music that can be made in this particular way when we talk about these symmetries. So you've seen that. Well, the thing I had to figure out in my, as a way to put something together is like, I needed something where I could put 4 numbers to it, right? Because we're still talking about the 4-dimensional space, and we're talking about symmetries. And one of the kind of, to me, most brilliant things about the paper was the way that you could reduce to a very simple calculation what these symmetries are, even the ones that you can't picture in your head. And so that meant this was a calculation that even I could do. And so all I needed was, what is a point? What is my point going to be, and what are the 4 numbers I'm going to put to it? And it occurred to me, and this is when I felt that maybe I was thinking like a mathematician, because a point doesn't have to be an infinitely small thing. It just can be a thing, right? A thing that you can describe with these 4 numbers. So I took an entire composition. I composed a 24-bar long song, which is it turns out it's in a blues, 12-bar blues form. And I called this my point, and then I gave it 4 numbers. All right, so, and you'll see how this could be useful to composing. So the first number is, I'm calling it transformation of the melody, position of the melody, but all it means is, what note does the melody start on? Okay, so I can choose a note that it starts on. I number them with the 1 through 12 just because there's 12 notes and you can just number them in order, right? And then it was like, well, what is the first bass note? Because in composing music that has multi-voices, it's the relationship between the melody note and the bass note that suggests what all the stuff in the middle is going to be, all right? So that was a very important number. And it also meant that when those numbers change, the stuff in the middle can change a lot, right? Then the third number is who's going to be the lead voice at the beginning, right? So I've got, as it turns out, we didn't plan this, I've got 12 players here, right, sitting in the chairs, and then there's the rhythm section. We can kind of consider that a separate thing. So I got 12 people. I gave them each a number, and depending, you know, whoever I started with, then that's the number that is in my original 4. And then the bottom number, the last number, is how many beats in the measure. Okay? This is very powerful, because when that number changes, the whole feel changes. Now, I had a little bit of a problem because sometimes you get negative numbers and you can't really have negative. So I use what we call the absolute value, which is you chop off the negative sign and you get a regular number. And it's kind of neat because it looks like a measure. You know, you get a line, and you get something, you get a line. So that's kind of cool. That's a you know, a little message from heaven that you're on the right track. So anyway, what happens is you take that number and then you kind of just put it through these 4 little processes, and these are your symmetries. So I've got a piece where I took my first number, you know, so the tune starts on the 5th note of the chromatic scale, the bass starts on the 1st note, or the 0 note, starts on the 2nd horn in the ensemble, and it's in 4/4. And then you rotate it once. I could have rotated it 8 times, but that would be a long piece. You rotate it once, and it starts on the note that's, you know, 4 half steps lower, and the bass note starts on the, you know, the 5th note above C, and, you know, it starts on the 0 person, and then it's in 2 beat, so it goes to a samba feel, and then you can see each of these transformations gives me different things to work with, and they sound very different, but it's always the same piece. It's the same. It's that point moved to these other places, right, and rotated or flipped or whatever these other 2 symmetries are, which we can't picture in our heads. Okay? And you'll hear that they're very, very different. It's the same, you'll hear the same theme over and over again, but it's quite transformed. And so I think that's...
This is when I knew you were a mathematician. I insisted there be no numbers, and no, he was so proud of this.
I mean, honestly... I consider this my initiation. But you know, the concepts don't need numbers, but reality requires numbers, right? You have once you try to make a thing out of it, you have to get specific, and so that's why it had to go this way. But you can imagine if I started with a different 4 pairs of numbers, I'd get a completely different piece of music. So anyway, this is the last one, number 5.
Give it up for the Hyperbolic Band.
There you have it. Hyperbolic band theory by the Hyperbolic Band.
Well, thank you for taking this journey with us. You've heard a musical representation of going from here to here to here. We hope that scientifically we'll get to here. Maybe that's part 2. See you in a year. Okay? But I think let's applaud and thank Jeff Peslap for the gift of music and for making the journey here to Saskatoon to premiere it for us.
I just want to say how grateful I am for Steve and his patience in explaining this language to me. And
no patience required. It was a beautiful journey, and I was so happy to take it with you. I was so stimulating for me. So
yeah, more to come.
Jeff.
I think more to come. And thank you, Dean.
Yeah.
I mean, you're the man.
Yeah. Dean made all of this happen, so let's give a big round of applause for Dean.
And also, thank you so much for to these brilliant musicians. Some of them I knew already. Some of them I met for the first time yesterday or Tuesday. No, yesterday was Tuesday, right? A week ago, too. Yesterday was Tuesday, and they're brilliant. This is not easy music, and both because it's new and because it's intricate and experimental, and they nailed it. Thank you so much. We have a lot of talent in Saskatoon.
We do, and I think one final thank you to all of you for supporting interdisciplinary scholarship, in this case the intersection between science, math, and music. So please, round of applause to all of you for being here.
And please join us. There's a reception now.
Supplies are limited. Get them while they're there. Just out in the hall behind you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone.